Hello everyone, and welcome back to Smiley's After Hours. It's been quite a while. In this episode, it's going to be quite a bit shorter one, I think. It's also horribly unscripted, so this is going to be a bit of a jumbled mess. It's more so what After Hours was originally supposed to be, and that is a way to transfer my essays into a more easily digestible format. As such, in the description, you will be able to find the link to the original essay, or at least, well, I'll probably be gathering inspiration from said essay, with a few more points that I don't bring up, and a few more points that are brought up there, that I don't bring up here. So, as such, what is that about? Well, it's about the nature of, vaguely, the history of the Malazan world, and what it means. It's about Edgewalker, it's about Calor, it's about, well, a few things really. So, on with the show. First and foremost, let's talk about the Prologue Memories of Ice. I'm not going to dwell too much on it, but what I would like to point out is that the Prologue Memories of Ice is very mythical in nature, but it is also stated very matter-of-factly. The characters participating in the scene are of mythical stature. The way the scene is framed is very, this is not real, but the Digest treats it as very tangible, you know? In the same way that they would speak of history 10, 20 years ago, they speak of history 120,000 years ago, which is obviously not history anymore, right? So, what does the Prologue Memories of Ice entail? It entails our boy Calor, the High King Calor Aegeran Destasula, and the three elder gods of Cruel, Draconis, and Nightchill, who have come to survey the land and curse them. A few things on this matter. It seems that a few people have had the apprehension that this is Calor's first and only empire, or at least first empire, which I don't think is the case, for a few reasons, which we'll get to in a moment. Another is that a few people seem to miss what I mentioned earlier, like it's very mythical in nature. Just like, yeah, so this guy, who is currently sitting on top of a throne made of bones, and is claiming the deaths of 7 million people, is just sitting around there waiting, you know. It's very, he's one mustache twirl away, like this, from like Saturday Night Villain. So, yeah. However, it does give us a time frame for when Calor existed and for when he was cursed. Okay? So, Calor was around and at large about 120,000 years ago. Now, Gargas is set supposedly 300,000 years ago, which is quite a while away, and yet Calor's name is dropped there as well, which has made a lot of people very angry. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure why. For one, Calors Empire in Jacuruku is supposed to have been consolidated over the course of 50 years before the fall. And we see something similar happen in Blood and Bone, where Calor is around. He has, you know, set himself up for success. He has built an empire. He is remembered somewhat fondly by those who actually lived under him, and less fondly by those who didn't. But, you know, he wasn't a permanent part of the history of that world, you know? Jacuruku has moved on from Calor, and to the Adwami, to the Thaumaturgs, and their remnants, even to Himatan and Ardada. It was never fully Calor's realm. It was more so a realm which Calor took and then said, you know what? This is going to be mine for a few years. And then someone pushed back really hard. But it's not his first nor his last bastion or empire. That's one thing. Another is that Calor is not just present in Gargas, but his name is also known to Azathanai, Like Draconis and Old Man know of him. Erastus knows him. Tetral knows him. I presume Mail and company know him. Hood knows of him. And so on and so forth. So Calor already has made a name for himself even in Garganas, which was a while ago, right? Which is weird for a few reasons, because as I mentioned, Garganas is way, way back compared to the chronology of the Book of the Fallen places Calor, like about 120,000 years ago. But it also places Calor at, being born when the Aimas were but children. It also places Calor at the earliest points of humanity. It places Calor as one of the first human empires, about concurrent with Symbolakis. So why are we so averse to the idea that Calor cannot be a character back in Garganas times? I'm not sure. I don't know. Moreover, I propose that Calor's role in Garganas is actually way more important than we originally gave him credit for. Because, so, I have 2 points that I wish to bring up in this regard. Number 1 is Serap Isgin. Not that one. The other one. And you might ask, what other one? And, well, so the first one, the Serap Isgin which we know of, is Hunral's cousin. And she is unceremoniously decapitated by Shrina Sankaru in Full of Light. Fun. But the other one I'm talking about is actually Serap of the Isgin line, who was Calor's wife. Okay. Great. What does that mean? Why is that important? Why do it bring this up? So, in that particular scene, in the Crippled God, through a flashback by Aparol Forge, we learn that a man, a Tais Leo-san, by the name of Hardagar, is Crinnafan's brother, and therefore Khadgar's uncle, which therefore makes Serap of the Isgin line his grandmother. Now, this Hardagar fellow also appears in Forge of Darkness, back there, and Full of Light, as Castellan of Nerdsor. Now, in that book, he is about the same age as Zerk. And, well, Zerk is not particularly old at this point in time, but the point remains, Hardagar is the same generation as Zerk, and his grandmother is Serap Isgin, which means that this Serap Isgin is 1 generation older than Vathar, Sadar, and Hunral, and 2 generations older than a Zerk and company. Which means that since the Isgin line of Serap was royalty, and possibly even claimants to the throne, this means that Calor was wedded to Tais royalty before Mother Duck's ascension. That's one. The other one is the rise of the Grey Shore and the Throne of Shadow. So, in Garganas, in Full of Light more specifically, we were introduced to, among other things, Dragnabur, the wagon, and Draconis' promise of a throne for the Sheikh. He mentions those on the shore, and the Nordata, Telrust, and Kirtle make mention of the Grey Shore, or more specifically, the rise of the Grey Shore. Narad, in one of his flashbacks, flash memories, flash visions, whatever, notices, as if brushed absent-mindedly by a dry brush, notices a throne. And then he mentions that someone is using the Sheikh for their own purposes and would kill to protect their secret. Then you have, say, Draconis promising Caplo a throne and a realm. You have Telrust and Kirtle seeking the Throne of Shadow. You have Ever-Wandering Eater, but Skabandari is nowhere to be found. And you have this notion that this has happened again. More specifically, I am talking about Laral Menas, a dragon, an elite, who was allegedly, I say allegedly, who was supposedly slain by the Watch at some point. And if I've read the scene correctly, the implication is that it was during the last assembling of Theon, which was when Draconis killed Habald Galas and ended the storm. Which also means that Narad is not the first Watch. It means that the dragon aspect of the Shadow has been slain. It means that the Throne of Shadow could have potentially been occupied before, and it possibly means that Emerlan, Kurald Emerlan, the shore, has been sundered before, because we have a lot of people being implicated on the sundering. We have Icarium and his destruction of the Nazath house to save Gothos, which we have not seen yet. Or we have seen it, but we just don't know when it was, because it was before Karkanos. We have a Cirque, we have an Amander, we have, obviously, Skabandari, we have Kilmandaros and company, we have Edgewalker, who is around in Reaper's Gale and committed elsewhere, and we also know, in Blood and Bone, we learned that he was somehow implicated in the destruction of Emerlan. Right? So, a lot of different people from wildly different backgrounds have been implicated somehow in the sundering of Emerlan. But perhaps the most absurd of all is that Yadan Derrig, of all people, is who drives the final nail on this by saying that Emerlan became the battlefield of many elder forces, not just the Geist. And the sundering led to the creation of a lot of different warrens from the split parts of Emerlan, right? Which is weird, but that need not happen just the once, because when the Sheikh arrive in Karkanos and they arrive at the Grey Shore, they notice a big fuck-off wall of light, right? They notice Lightfall, and Yadan places together that there used to be a place here, there used to be a realm here, but it's gone. It's gone. It's plucked away and just gone. Galan seems to support a similar idea, that Coral Galane is an island jostling in the ether and treating with lands and realms have seen. In effect, what I'm saying is, Shadow has been warrenified, if you will, multiple times, and Cruel's warrens, and subsequently Coral Demerlan, Coral Galane, Coral Thirlan, are simply the latest implication of all of this. Great. What does Calor have to do with that? Similarly, in Blood and Bone, and Net of Knives, but mostly Blood and Bone, we learn that Edgewalker makes Celeste sad, because presumably she, unlike us, is privy to his backstory, his background, and has knowledge of who he is, or what he is. In Knight of Knives, we learn that Edgewalker is entombed. He has been enslaved. Entombed being a word for basically enslavement by Shadow House. He is a servant of Shadow. He's a slave to Shadow. That he has been serving it for untold millennia. That he once ruled it, but no longer. And from the Bone Hunters, we learn that Edgewalker has existed for untold millennia. Right? His crime, if you will, or rather, he throws a half-failed insult to Cotillion and the dragons that, their crime was ambition, and perhaps that is an endemic trait. Which could encompass himself as well. That's not something that couldn't be happening. In also the Bone Hunters, he mentions that he takes on a very nothing changes approach to history. He has seen all the patterns that there are to be seen. These things have happened before and will continue happening and happen again and again. And overall, especially in End of Knives, he sees a potential for change in Catellian and Namanas and Calor and Dancer, because only these two are seemingly ambitious enough to challenge the status quo, to not repeat past mistakes, to tread different paths. That aside, what I would also like to bring up is that in DeLanding, which is also back there, it's actually that book right there, orange background. He is instructed by Koro that Calor and Dancer are currently invading, I suppose, the Scarred Lands, which Calor sort of appropriates and turns into the Imperial Warren. And we then learn that the Scarred Lands are not actually under Edgewalker's purview. And the Scarred Lands, the Imperial Warren, are also just different names, basically, for the destroyed continent of Jakaruku, the remnants of Jakaruku, that were just quietly swept under the rug, so to speak. Where does all that leave us? Well, it leaves us with a character who has no business being in Gargas, but who has apparently had comings and goings with the Teist before, who has pissed off multiple Azathani to the point where they curse him, to the point where he considers them his rivals. Right? He calls them dear rivals. A character who is the personification of ambition, per his own admittedly sarcastic, but it still applies, words. A character who is somehow connected with a lot of different things, seemingly from nowhere. You know, he is apparently fucking everywhere, you know? He was in Jonabakis, he was in Leather, he was in Jakaruku for a while. He even found Eriko, I think. No, it was Jakaru. Basically, he was in a lot of places. He has studied a lot of things. He has discovered a lot of things. My proposition, therefore, is that Edgewalker is the ascendant part of Calor, Adar, and Tesula. That Edgewalker, in a similar vein to Dassam and Decembre, is a split-off part of the High King, who, among other things, represents how Calor... It's sort of like a portrait of Dorian Gray situation, where his portrait ages, but it's not really a portrait, when it's literally the guy. Edgewalker looks how Calor would look if he didn't use alchemy candles. Edgewalker understands and accepts the crime of ambition, and guides others away from it, or onto it. Edgewalker is a guardian because he has been enslaved by what he sought to rule. He is cursed, after a manner, if you will. Calor cannot ascend because he already has ascended unto becoming Edgewalker, and so he can't really do it again. And so on, and so forth. Now, what are the problems with this theory? And why do people sort of, admittedly, understandably dislike it? Well, Calor's shtick is that he's human. Calor is the most human of all humans. Calor is the personification of humanity. Calor is a paradigm of humanity. And so making him some vestige of a long split off deity, well, he then went on to become whatever he became, would be a bit lame. I'm not saying that he is not human, mind you, because I've seen this theory as well with Calor, like Azathani or something. I don't think he is. I think he's perfectly human, even before he became Edgewalker, right? I think, ultimately, what turns people away from this theory is Kallor can only be so important, right? I mean, he can only be so important to the narrative. He can only be so important to what makes the character. Like, he's so many things already. He's implicated in so many different ways already. Let's just let Edgewalker be someone else. And, yeah, though I disagree with one of the more common candidates, save for the one that claims he's a Zathani, because that's sort of falsifiable. And it's partly why I actually kind of like Kallor being Edgewalker, because it's sort of out there, it sort of makes sense, and it's less lame than the alternative. But it's also just a bit too extreme to make sense. So, I guess I'm going to have to ask, what do you think? Who do you think Edgewalker is? And because this is, I think, a discussion we should have with Walk and Shadow pending, and his appearance in The Gods of Willing. He's clearly still relevant to today's narrative, even after his introduction in the Knives, which was like in, 2005? It's been 20 fucking years. He was probably conceived in the 90s. We still don't know who he is, and he's still making appearances. So, he's clearly a pretty important character, at least for the community as a whole, even if he's not a terribly important character within the world. So, who do you think Edgewalker is? What do you think his identity is? I'm eager to hear your takes.